I'm not a good father and I never will be. I feel alone and I don't think there is anyone currently in my life who would care to listen to my life story and confessions. Not now anyways. So, here I am sharing it with anyone who'll listen. It's a long story, but I hope there's someone out there who'll take the time to read through it, so I would know that I had at least one person to say goodbye to. I am 39, am a single father to my daughter F13. My partner, let's call her S, passed away during the delivery of our daughter. We weren't married, but had planned to do so after the birth of our daughter. For context, in my early 20s, I realized that I didn't have what it took to be a good parent. I knew from example, with how my parents raised me, what a good family was like, what good parents were like, and what it took to be a good father. But whenever I imagined myself in that position, putting myself in my father's shoes, I knew I could never be as good of a father as he was to me. I didn't have what it took to be as selfless as him, as committed as him, as patient as him, as caring and providing as him. I knew that, should I ever find myself in the position of a parent, I would not be remembered as a good father by my children, but merely as a male figure in their life who provided what was necessary for them. Not a dad, not a father, just the man who provided what they needed to live. I would never amount to anything close to the ideal father that my dad was to me. And it was because of this realization that I had sworn to myself that I would never have children. No child deserved to be raised by a father who could not give them the love and care that they so rightfully needed and deserved. I knew that, no matter what I did, I would never be able to truly give any child of mine all that they deserved. Which is why things took a turn for the worst when S became pregnant. S and I had met when we were third years at college. We'd hit it off pretty quickly, having so much in common. She truly was the love of my life, and I doubt I will ever meet anyone who could make me feel the way that she did. It was early on in our relationship where we had both made it clear that we wanted to be child-free. We talked about families, children, etc., and she confessed that she never wanted children because of her family situation growing up as well as a health complication that she didn't want to pass on to any children she might have. You see, S had non-type 2 severe asthma, the type of asthma one is born with and has no outright cure for. Her lungs were basically crippled since birth, unable to develop completely and struggled to provide the necessary oxygen most people required. She always carried 3 different types of inhalers, they're only to provide some form of relief, but had lived her entire life avoiding things that required strenuous activity. Even climbing up stairs could leave her gasping for air, suffering from asthma attacks. Naturally, I understood her reasoning for not wishing to potentially subject any of her children to the same suffering she'd experienced her entire life. In fact, when I later confessed my misgivings about being a parent myself and told her about my predicted shortcomings that I would have as a father, she told me that she was relieved that we were on the same page regarding children. After graduating college, we moved in together and started working in our respective fields, her in sports science, something she'd chosen to do because of all the activities she'd missed out on in her life, and me in literature, working as an editor in a publishing firm for novels. Roughly a year or so after we moved in together, we discovered that she was pregnant. This naturally came as a shock to us as, prior to moving in together, I'd taken it upon myself to get a vasectomy. While S and I did not want children, we still had a relatively active sex life. Of course, it was particularly mild due to her condition, but active nonetheless. Thus, in addition to my vasectomy, S had been on birth control regularly to both help with managing her cycles, as well as to create a redundant safeguard just in case. Of course, this brought up a lot of questions in my mind. After all, it should have been impossible for me to have children. But I didn't question her faithfulness or integrity. After all, S rarely ever left the house due to her condition, and we had no problems in our relationship. Naturally, this led to the discussion on how to proceed. We spent many nights talking about what we should do, how to solve this situation, etc. I brought up the option of an abortion many times, and while S did not outright dismiss my suggestion, for some reason she seemed hesitant. Finally, after 2 weeks of back and forth, she finally confessed to wanting to keep the baby. This confession of hers confused me greatly. After all, for our entire relationship, we'd been in agreement on our stance when it came to children. This eventually led to a couple of arguments which strained our relationship quite a bit. But eventually, I caved. I loved S. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. So I decided to put my concerns aside for her sake. Yet, I believed and still believe that it was a supremely selfish decision on my part to let her go through with her pregnancy. After all, I knew what kind of father I would be. I knew that I wasn't enough of a man to be a proper father. Yet I still allowed myself to be put in the position of a parent because I selfishly did not want to lose the love of my life. However, I convinced myself that, despite my shortcomings, despite the fact that I knew I wouldn't be a good father, perhaps S would be able to make up for all that I lacked and that, together, we would be able to make things work and provide a good life for our child. And so, over the course of her pregnancy, S and I prepared thoroughly for the arrival of our child, of the new member of our unexpected family. We bought all the necessary supplies: cribs, clothing, bottles, diapers, toys, children's books, everything. I'd even repainted the guest room we had, transforming it into the baby room that matched all of S's requirements that she'd requested. And then the day arrived. S's water broke around 2 a.m., Thursday, May 12, 2011. I quickly rushed her to the hospital, worried out of my mind but feigning calm to keep her calm. I'd thoroughly prepared myself to sit by her side throughout the delivery, holding her hand, providing support in any way that I could. But I never got the chance. The stress and exertion of childbirth took a toll on her. As soon as the process began, S suffered a major asthma attack. Her lungs could not keep up with the exertion. The doctors put her on a ventilator before deciding to perform a C-section. In fact, they had recommended it from the start. But S had stubbornly refused, stating that she would perform the delivery naturally. The doctors and I had repeatedly tried to convince her otherwise, but she wouldn't budge. In the end, despite the ventilator, despite the C-section, despite everything, S, the love of my life, my best friend, passed away. She was pronounced brain dead halfway through the operation, her brain starved of oxygen, with the doctors unable to do anything to save her as her lungs could not diffuse enough oxygen into her blood for both the delivery and her brain. She remained in a coma for 2 days before eventually passing. And so, there I was alone, left behind by the person I loved the most in this world, completely out of my depth, and carrying a newborn child that I hadn't the slightest clue how to properly care for. The months that followed passed by in a blur. The days seemed to blend together as I struggled to cope with my situation. I mourned the loss of my love. I struggled to care for a child I truly wasn't prepared for. I battled against a deep depression that seemed to pervade my very being. I struggled to balance all of this with my career, very nearly losing my job and my one means of providing for my daughter. If not for the timely support of my parents, I would never have been able to make it through that period of my life. But, as always, time waits for no one. The months flew by as I did my best to bury my pain and focus all my efforts into my responsibilities, into doing my best to be the father that S and my own selfishness had forced me to become. Which brings me to my daughter, my only remaining reason for living. My daughter, let's call her Z, is a bright kid. Unlike her mother, Z was born perfectly healthy with no signs of any health complications, which was a relief. And of course, because of the nigh impossibility regarding the circumstances of her conception, I'd made the decision to perform a paternity test, something that, in hindsight, I deeply regret doing as it directly spat in the face of my relationship with S. Naturally, the results came back positive, indicating that I was indeed her biological father, despite the sheer odds of such a thing being possible. Anyways, growing up, Z was what my parents described as a delightful and effortless child to care for, which was apparently in contrast to the struggles they'd faced in raising me. From early on, she displayed levels of intelligence beyond her years. She rarely ever caused any trouble. She does well in school, and seems to have a lot of friends, some of whom she's been friends with since primary school. She's had a few of them over to the house for sleepovers and other activities, so I believe she is content with her relationships outside of the house. Over the course of Z's life, I believe I've done what was expected of me as her father. I provided a home, cared for her needs as a baby with the help of my parents, taught her how to read and write, took her on occasional trips, sent her to private school, threw birthday parties every year at the house with her friends, bought her whatever she wanted, and did my best to make myself available to her after completing my duties at work in order to facilitate her wants and needs. all in the vain hope of being there for her, just enough, whenever she needed it. However, I know deep in my heart that all I've done is merely the bare minimum, merely what is expected of me, something that should go without saying as a parent. It's not enough for me to qualify as a decent father, and I believe she has come to realize and understand this as well. And the reason I say this is because it is apparent in my interactions with her. Despite the seemingly good nature of our relationship to those who would view us from an outside perspective, there is a sense of distance between us that I believe is readily apparent to the both of us. Nowadays, the way we interact with each other, the things we talk about, the things we do together as father and daughter, even the way we view each other is not how things are supposed to be in a healthy family. Hell, it's hardly even remotely comparable to the little that we did do together when she was younger. It is especially apparent when viewed in comparison to how she interacts with my parents, her grandparents. With them, she seems relaxed, unguarded, free-spirited, open. Whenever she has a problem that doesn't involve money, the first people she turns to is them, not me. If she is having trouble in her relationships with people at school, she turns to her grandmother for advice, spending hours hidden in her room behind closed doors, speaking to her on the phone. If she is struggling with her homework, instead of coming to me, she turns to her grandfather for help, calling him over video call to help her understand where she is getting stuck. Many a time I have attempted to speak with her about these things, every night asking her about her day while we have dinner, how she's getting along in school, if she needs any help with her work, if she's struggling with anything, if she needs me in any way, shape, or form. However, each time, she responds vaguely. School was fine. I'm good with my homework. Nope, nothing's wrong. In fact, even the displays of affection that we used to share have all but vanished. Where we used to greet each other with bright smiles and hugs, now exists bland smiles of acknowledgement on her part, the type one would give a stranger when passing them on the sidewalk, and half-hearted greetings in response to my attempts at communication, followed by curt responses and short-lived conversations, all while snubbing any attempt at physical contact when trying to initiate a hug to welcome her home. Any attempt at potentially rekindling, or perhaps, in this case, it would be more accurate to say forming, any kind of connection is stonewalled before any progress can be made. Too little, too late, I suppose. As I sit here writing this, I know that no fault lies with her for the state of our relationship. What I am experiencing now is entirely of my own making, the result of the choices I made as her guardian and my neglect in my role as her father. I knew that this outcome would manifest from the moment I understood I could never truly be a decent father all the way back in my 20s. This outcome was inevitable. I simply lacked the qualities needed to build a decent parental relationship with my child. In the times where I should have been sitting with her on the living room floor, accompanying her on her adventures made manifest through her imagination while playing make-believe with her toys, I instead lacked the patience to participate in such a thing. My role as her companion otherwise occupied by her grandfather whenever they came to visit, all while I channeled my focus towards my career in the hopes of being able to provide more for her in the future. In the times where she wished to visit the local park right after returning home from school, hoping to go play on the swings and experience the rush of wind in her hair as she was pushed higher and higher, giggling all the while in childlike wonder and innocence, instead of readily dropping everything I was doing while working from home, I willfully denied the opportunity to facilitate a bonding moment with her, focusing my attention instead on achieving deadlines, attending meetings, outperforming my colleagues, striving for promotions, and allowing another one of my roles as a parent to be filled by her grandmother in my stead. Throughout her entire childhood, the only moments in which I can confidently state that I had performed more than the bare minimum that was required of me in my role as her father were fleeting. The occasional late-night Disney movie where we cuddled up together on the couch, buried under blankets with a bowl of popcorn, singing along to the tunes of Frozen, Tangled, and Moana. The occasional trip to the ocean, enjoying what little vacation time I had available to me during her school breaks, relaxing at beach resorts, splashing in the waves, building sandcastles, and catching crabs. The occasional visit to the dog park over the weekend, taking her to extracurricular activities such as ballet, swimming, and piano lessons, while sitting in on each one to witness her progress and achievements. I have had many opportunities to build a bond with my daughter. In fact, I even had the foresight to acknowledge my shortcomings long before she was even born. Yet, Even with that, even though I knew what I needed to do in order for me to be a good father to her, I still managed to fuck it up. In my 20s, I had the foresight to know what the consequences of the choices I made throughout her childhood would be. Yet, in the moment of making those choices, I was somehow rendered blind to them. For whatever reason, when it mattered most, my foresight from all those years ago was nowhere to be seen, and, despite all the advantages I had provided for myself for moments such as those, despite providing myself with a detailed map of all the hazards that littered my potential future paths, I still managed to choose the routes that ultimately led to my present circumstances. Circumstances in which I am nothing more than a male figure in her life who merely provides the things she needs to live. A wallet, a bank account, a food dispenser, a guard dog. Once again, my selfishness, my impatience, my self-centeredness disguised as my eagerness to better provide, my incompetence, has led me to a future I had sworn to myself so many years ago to avoid at all costs. A potential future I had once deemed my worst-case scenario is now very much my present nightmare. For what it's worth, I love my daughter, more than she'll likely ever know or care to believe. I would tear my own heart out from my chest if it meant giving her a life in which she could look back on and smile with no regrets. Every time I look at her, I'm filled with so much pride, love, and happiness. But it is also tainted with regret. Regret at my failures, of how I failed her as a father. I know now that no matter what I do, I'll never be able to have a close relationship with her. As I said, too little, too late. Someday, she'll graduate high school. She'll toss up her cap alongside her peers, celebrating the achievement before she moves into the crowd of proud spectators, running to hug the man who helped her through her struggles in her studies. However, that man won't be me. Instead, it'll be my father, her grandfather, the man who had embodied the father that she has always deserved. Then, she'll turn to the other person who supported her through all the tough times, hugging them tightly in a tender embrace, expressing her gratitude for all the emotional support that they had provided her. However, that person won't be me. Instead, it'll be my mother, her grandmother, the woman who embodied the mother she never got to meet, the other half of the parental figure that she so rightfully deserved. Finally, she'll turn to the final spectator. She'll flash him an empty smile, one that doesn't quite reach her eyes, before giving him a brief and fleeting hug to show her appreciation for the person who had provided her the opportunity to attend this school. And yet, before that person can express how proud they are of her achievement, of how proud they are of her, she'll have already returned her attention to the two who truly deserved it. And all I'll be able to do is smile, because she'll have already given me more than I deserved. Someday, even further into the future, she'll fall in love. She'll have met the person whom she wishes to spend the rest of her life with. She'll be all dressed up for her big day, displaying the most beautiful smile in the world as she's led down the aisle by the man she had chosen to guide her to the altar, the same way he had guided her throughout her entire life. However, that man won't be me. Instead, it'll once again be my father, her grandfather, the man who had helped raise and shape the woman she had come to be. And I'd be there, looking on with pride as my little girl takes another step forward in her life, wishing her all the love in the world. I'd be there, hoping that the person she'd chosen as her partner would be a better parent to her children than I ever could have been for her. I suppose it isn't outlandish to say that I feel a sort of jealousy towards the relationship my parents share with my daughter. It is something I truly envy. Yet, I know that such feelings are irrational. I had known what needed to be done in order to have such a relationship for myself, what I had needed to do to develop that kind of relationship with my daughter. But I failed. I chose wrongly. I discarded any right to want such a thing. I made my bed, and now I need to lay in it. I wish you were here. You'd know what to do. You'd know how to fix this. You'd know how to make things right. I miss you, but I'll see you soon. Zoe, sweetheart, if you ever end up finding this, I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you so suddenly. I'm sorry that I wasn't strong enough to stick around to fix my mistakes. I'm sorry I couldn't be the dad you deserved. I'm sorry I failed you. No matter what, please remember that Daddy loves you. I always will. David.